On the morning of her wedding, Natalie slipped into her ivory dress feeling, for the first time in years, almost whole. Then Ranger, her devoted German shepherd, planted himself in the doorway and growled low at the man waiting at the altar. He refused to move, eyes fixed on Christopher, body tense with warning. Minutes later, a plain wrapped gift began to tick softly in the foyer. What did the dog see that no one else could? And would Natalie trust him before the day turned deadly? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The old church dressing room smelled of polished wood and faint rain drifting through the cracked window. Outside, gray clouds hung low over the town, muting the light that fell across the floorboards in soft, weary patches. Natalie stood before the tall mirror, 35 years old, fair-skinned, with shoulder-length wavy brown hair falling loose in natural curls. She wore the simple ivory A-line wedding dress, its light V-neck and thin lace sleeves catching the dim glow from the window. Slim and athletic at 5'7", she moved with the quiet strength of someone who had carried much alone. Her eyes, usually steady, held a faint weariness today. She had lost her parents young, grown up in the quiet of foster homes, and later watched a long relationship fade into silence. The dress felt like a promise she was not entirely sure she deserved. She turned slowly, the fabric whispering against the floor, and caught her reflection, still the same woman who had learned early that people leave, but animals stay. She knelt. Ranger came close at once, 6 years old, a male German shepherd with the classic black and tan coat, thick fur clean but slightly tousled from the morning's walk. He stood 26 inches at the shoulder, muscular and lean, large brown eyes alert and deep. Around his neck he wore a black leather collar with his name tag engraved, Ranger. And Natalie had tied a small white ribbon there that morning, a gentle joke between them. He pressed his head against her chest. She wrapped her arms around him, the warmth of his body steady against the chill in the room. "You're the only family I've got," she whispered, her voice low and raw. Her eyes reddened as memories rose unbidden, the empty chairs at holidays, the nights when the house felt too large, the way Ranger had always been there, lying at her feet while she cried or simply stared at the wall. He had never once looked away. The moment held. Then Ranger stiffened. His ears flicked forward. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not loud, but deep and certain. He pulled away from her embrace and turned toward the window, body tense, hackles rising along his back. Natalie followed his gaze. Nothing visible outside, just the gray day and the bare branches of the oaks. She reached to stroke his side. "Easy, boy. It's just the wind." But he did not relax. He paced 2 steps, then returned to her side, eyes fixed on the glass, muscles coiled. His breathing came short and deliberate. Natalie felt the first thread of unease weave through her chest. She had seen him like this before, when he sensed smoke before the alarm, when he had pulled her from the path of a car that night on the wet road years ago. He did not growl without reason. The door opened softly. 2 bridesmaids stepped in, young women in pale blue dresses, their laughter trailing off when they saw Natalie kneeling on the floor. One of them, Sarah, tilted her head. "You okay? You've been in here a while." Natalie stood, smoothing the dress, forcing a small smile. "Just talking to my best man." The women chuckled lightly, but their eyes lingered on Ranger, who had not moved, still watching the window. The room grew quieter. The rain tapped once, twice, against the pane. Natalie placed a hand on Ranger's head. He leaned into her touch, but his gaze never left the glass. Something was wrong. She felt it in the air, in the stillness of his body, in the way her own heart had begun to beat a little too hard. She looked at herself in the mirror again. The dress was beautiful. The day was supposed to be beautiful. Yet the quiet promise she had made to herself years ago to never again trust blindly stirred beneath her ribs. Ranger had never lied to her. People had. She knelt once more, pressed her forehead to his, and breathed in the familiar scent of his fur. "Whatever it is," she murmured, "we'll face it together." Ranger's tail gave one slow wag. The growl softened, but did not vanish entirely. Outside, the rain fell a little harder. The church foyer carried the scent of old oak pews and damp wool from the coats of arriving guests. Rain tapped steadily against the tall stained-glass windows, turning the light inside to a soft, bruised gray. Guests filtered in slowly, shaking rain from umbrellas, their voices low and polite. Natalie stood near the side door, still in her ivory wedding dress, the lace sleeves now slightly damp from brushing against the window earlier. Ranger stayed close, his black and tan coat gleaming faintly under the chandelier's muted glow. He had not relaxed since the dressing room. His ears stayed forward, tail low, but not tucked. When the first wave of people approached to offer congratulations, he stepped forward, body rigid, a low rumble in his chest that never quite became a bark. Natalie placed a hand on his head. She felt the tension in his muscles, the way his breathing stayed shallow and quick. She knew this posture. It was the same one he had taken years ago on that dark road when he had frozen mid-step, nose high, then lunged to pull her back from the path of an oncoming truck whose brakes had failed in the rain. That night he had saved her life without hesitation. Today he was doing something similar, though she could not yet see the shape of the danger. Logan arrived next. 34 years old, fair-skinned like his brother, short, messy light brown hair, a faint stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore a light gray suit that hung a little loose, pale blue shirt, tie knotted carelessly. His eyes darted often, carrying the look of a man who had carried secrets too long. He smiled when he saw Natalie, arms opening for a hug. Ranger moved instantly, positioning himself between them, hackles raised, a deep growl rolling out like distant thunder. Logan froze, hands dropping to his sides. "Whoa, easy there," he said, voice thin with forced lightness. Natalie knelt, fingers in Ranger's ruff. "He's never done this with family," she murmured, more to herself. Logan shifted his weight, glancing toward the main doors. The air between them thickened. Guests nearby paused, conversations trailing off into uneasy quiet. Natalie felt a small crack open in her certainty. Ranger had always read people better than she did. She looked at Logan again, really looked, and saw the flicker of something unspoken in his eyes, a shadow that had not been there before. Then the gift appeared. A small box wrapped in plain brown paper sat on the foyer table. No card, no name. It had not been there 10 minutes earlier. Ranger's head snapped toward it. He crossed the room in 3 strides, lowered his nose, and stiffened. A soft ticking sound came from inside, faint, mechanical, steady. He backed up 1 step, then lunged, teeth closing on the edge of the paper. It tore easily. A corner of metal glinted beneath, something with wires, a small red light blinking once. Ranger growled louder now, body low, refusing to let anyone near. Natalie's breath caught. She remembered the smell that night on the road, sharp, chemical, wrong, and how Ranger had known before she did. Guests gathered, murmuring. Someone whispered, "Bomb." Natalie stepped forward slowly. Ranger turned his head, brown eyes meeting hers, urgent, pleading, protective. She knelt beside him, hand trembling as she touched the torn paper. The ticking continued, small and relentless. Her heart beat in time with it. She had trusted Christopher with everything. Now doubt crept in like the rain through the cracks. Ranger pressed against her leg, warm and solid. He had never been wrong. The foyer grew still. Rain drummed harder on the roof. Natalie looked at the gift, then at Ranger, then at the faces around her. Curious, worried, uncertain. She felt the weight of years alone settle again, but this time Ranger stood with her. She leaned down, forehead against his. "You always know," she whispered. "Thank you." His tail gave 1 slow sweep. The ticking went on, but in that moment she believed him completely. The organ swelled softly in the nave, notes drifting like mist through the high rafters. Rain streaked the stained glass, casting watery colors across the aisle, reds and blues bleeding into the polished wood floor. Natalie stepped from the foyer into the main hall. The ivory dress caught the candlelight, lace sleeves shimmering faintly. She held her bouquet of white roses close to her chest, petals cool against her skin. Guests turned, faces softening with smiles. Christopher waited at the altar, 38 years old, fair-skinned, short dark brown hair neatly parted, clean-shaven. He wore the black tailored suit with quiet dignity, white shirt crisp, navy tie straight. Yet his hands clasped too tightly in front of him, knuckles pale. When their eyes met, he offered the smile she had loved for 2 years, the one that once made the empty rooms in her house feel smaller. But today it faltered at the edges. She took her first step down the aisle. Ranger moved with her, close at her left side, black and tan coat brushing her skirt. His pace matched hers perfectly, as it always had. Then he stopped, abruptly. Body low, head turned toward Christopher. A low growl began in his throat, steady, not loud, but unmistakable. Natalie paused. Guests murmured. She looked at Christopher again. His face had gone pale. One hand drifted to his jacket pocket, fingers pressing the fabric as if to hold something in place. His eyes flicked away from hers. She tried again. Another step. Ranger shifted, positioning his broad shoulder across her path. He did not bark. He simply stood, unyielding, eyes locked on the man at the far end of the aisle. Natalie felt the air thicken around her. The organist faltered for a moment, then recovered. Whispers spread like ripples through the pews. She knelt slowly, the dress pooling on the wood. Ranger turned his head toward her. His brown eyes held hers, deep, calm, certain. She reached out. Her fingers found the warm fur behind his ears. "What do you know that I don't?" she whispered, voice breaking on the last word. Tears welled, not from fear yet, but from the sudden ache of recognition. Ranger leaned in. His rough tongue touched the back of her hand once, gentle, deliberate, the same way he had licked her palm the night she sat alone on the porch after the last breakup, rain falling then, too. In that touch she felt years of quiet companionship, nights when he lay across her feet while she stared at the ceiling, mornings when his steady breathing woke her before the alarm. He had never asked for anything. He had simply stayed. The moment stretched. Guests watched in uneasy silence. Christopher took half a step forward, then stopped. His hand stayed near his pocket. Natalie rose. She looked down the aisle again. Really looked. The man she had planned a life with stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes shadowed by something heavier than nerves. Doubt settled in her chest like damp air. Ranger pressed against her leg, warm and solid. She placed a hand on his head once more. The growl softened to a low rumble, but he did not move from her path. She understood then, in the quiet between heartbeats, that trust could be simple. Ranger had never wavered. People had. She leaned down, forehead resting briefly against his. "I hear you," she said softly. The words carried no anger, only a tired, tender acceptance. Ranger's tail gave one slow sweep across the floor. The organ played on, notes lingering in the rain-scented air. She straightened. The aisle waited, but she did not move forward yet. She waited, for clarity, for truth, for whatever came next. The aisle seemed longer now. The organ hushed into silence. Rain hammered the roof like distant drums, and the candle flames shivered in their brass holders, throwing unsteady light across the faces in the pews. Natalie stood halfway down the aisle, Ranger still at her side, body low and unyielding. She looked straight at Christopher. His face had drained of color, sweat beaded along his hairline despite the cool air. She spoke quietly, but the words carried through the stillness. "Show me what's in your pocket." He hesitated. His hand hovered near the jacket, fingers trembling. Guests shifted in their seats. Ranger's growl deepened, a low vibration she felt through her leg. Christopher swallowed. Slowly, he reached inside. A small black device slipped out, metal casing, wires coiled tight, a tiny red light blinking in steady rhythm. It clattered to the wood floor. The ticking from the foyer gift echoed in memory, louder now in the quiet. Natalie stared at it. Her breath caught. Ranger stepped forward one pace, nose low, confirming what she already knew. The guests gasped. Someone whispered, "Bomb." Christopher dropped to his knees. His shoulders shook. "I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "They had me. Old debts from before I met you. I thought I could fix it alone. I didn't want to drag you in." Tears tracked down his face. He looked up at her, eyes raw, pleading, full of the same regret she had seen in her own mirror years ago. She felt the ground shift beneath her. Trust had been fragile. Now it lay shattered at her feet. Yet in his broken voice she heard the man she had loved, the one who had listened to her stories of foster homes without judgment, who had held her when the nights grew too long. The doors at the back burst open. A man strode in, 42 years old, pale skin, short dark hair, under a black baseball cap pulled low, no beard, stocky and muscular at 6 feet. He wore a long black leather jacket over black jeans and sneakers, gloves on his hands. No words, just the glint of a pistol as he raised it toward the altar. Screams erupted. Guests ducked. Christopher froze on his knees. Natalie turned. Time slowed. Ranger moved before she could think. He launched forward, muscles coiling, paws silent on the wood, straight at the intruder. His jaws closed on the man's gun arm. A shot cracked, wild, burying itself in the ceiling. The stranger howled. Blood bloomed dark on the sleeve. Ranger held fast, twisting, dragging the arm down. The pistol clattered away. Natalie cried out, "Ranger, no!" Her voice broke on his name. Fear flooded her, not for herself, but for him. She saw the flash of pain in his eyes as the man struck with his free hand, fist connecting with Ranger's shoulder. The dog yelped once, sharp and brief, but did not let go. He pulled harder. The stranger stumbled, then fell. Ranger released the arm and placed himself between Natalie and the fallen man, chest heaving, a thin line of blood on his muzzle. Guests rushed forward. Someone kicked the gun aside. The stranger groaned, clutching his arm. Ranger stood firm, ears flat, eyes locked on the threat, until the man stopped moving. Natalie ran to him. She dropped to her knees beside Ranger, hands shaking as she touched his side. Warm blood matted the fur on his shoulder, not deep but enough to stain her dress. He turned his head, brown eyes meeting hers, steady, exhausted, but alive. She pressed her forehead to his, tears falling freely now. "You foolish, brave boy," she whispered. "You always protect me." He leaned into her, breath ragged but warm against her cheek. In that moment, she understood. He had carried her through every loss, every empty night, without ever asking to be carried himself. Christopher crawled closer, face streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry," he repeated, voice small. Natalie looked at him, not with anger, but with the quiet sorrow of someone who had learned too much too late. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor, weak but deliberate. The rain outside softened to a steady patter. She held Ranger close, feeling his heartbeat slow to something steady again. Whatever came next, forgiveness, truth, the rest of the day, she knew one thing. This dog had given her back her life, more than once, and she would never take that gift for granted. The church grew quiet after the chaos. Rain had eased to a gentle patter on the roof, and the candles burned steady again, their light warm on the worn wooden pews. Sirens faded in the distance, leaving only the soft murmur of voices and the occasional creak of floorboards. 2 officers stepped inside, older men, faces lined with years on the job. One, gray-haired and broad-shouldered, carried the weight of too many hard nights in his eyes. They spoke low to Christopher first. He sat on the front pew now, head bowed, hands clasped between his knees. The small black device lay in an evidence bag on the altar table, its red light finally dark. The stranger had been led away in cuffs, arm bandaged, head down. The officers confirmed what Ranger had known all along. The man was an enforcer for a loan shark ring, the device a crude timer meant to intimidate, not destroy. Christopher looked up at them, voice steady but small. "I'll testify, all of it, names, dates, everything. The gray-haired officer nodded once, a gesture that carried no judgment, only the quiet recognition of a man who had seen regret before. Natalie stood a few paces away, still in her stained wedding dress, one hand resting on Ranger's head. The dog sat beside her, shoulder bandaged by a paramedic who had come with the police. His breathing was even now, though his eyes stayed watchful. She felt the warmth of him against her leg, steady as always. Christopher turned to her. His suit was rumpled, tie loosened, dark hair falling across his forehead. He did not rise. "I should have told you," he said. "The debts started years ago, before you. I thought I could outrun them. I was wrong." His voice cracked on the last word. Tears stood in his eyes, not dramatic, just honest. Natalie looked at him, really looked, and saw the man she had fallen in love with beneath the fear, the one who had brought coffee to her shelter shifts, who had listened to her talk about Ranger without ever making her feel foolish for loving a dog more than most people. She knelt in front of him. Ranger shifted closer, but did not growl. She took Christopher's hand. It trembled. "I'm angry," she said softly. "But I'm not leaving." His shoulders sagged with relief. She squeezed his fingers once, then let go. Forgiveness was not instant. It was a door cracked open, a promise to walk through together, slowly, honestly. The officers watched without speaking. One of them placed a small medal on Ranger's collar, a simple silver shield engraved with Hero. Ranger tilted his head, ears flicking at the unfamiliar weight. Natalie rose. She looked around the church, at the guests who had stayed, faces softened by what they had witnessed, at the candles still burning, at Ranger who had not left her side. She felt something shift inside her chest, like ice melting after a long winter. She had spent years believing she was alone. Ranger had taught her otherwise. Christopher had reminded her that people could change if given the chance. She spoke quietly to the gray-haired officer. "I want to help. There are others caught in this, people like him, people like me who didn't know until it was almost too late." The officer nodded. "We'll take your statement, and his." She looked down at Ranger. His brown eyes met hers, calm, deep, full of the same quiet certainty he had always carried. She knelt again, fingers tracing the new medal. "You saved more than me today," she whispered. "You saved us all." He leaned into her touch, tail sweeping once across the floor. In that simple gesture, she saw the years ahead, not perfect, not without scars, but shared. She would start a fund for rescue dogs, animals like Ranger who had been given second chances and gave them back in return. She would help others find the same quiet healing she had found in his steady presence. Christopher stood slowly. He offered his hand. She took it. The rain outside had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, faint but real, touching the stained glass in soft gold. Natalie looked at the man beside her, at the dog at her feet. She breathed in the scent of wax and wet wood and fur. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something earned. Ranger's tail thumped once more. She smiled, small, tired, true. The day was not over. It was only beginning. As this story ends, remember the quiet battles many older hearts face every day. Loneliness after loss, aching bodies, long nights with illness and worry. Like Natalie found comfort in Ranger's loyalty, no one should walk these years alone. Your life still matters. Your memories, your pain, your faith, all have meaning. If you are hurting, please reach out to family, friends, or even this community. Share your thoughts, leave a comment, and subscribe so we can walk together. May God bless you with strength, comfort your body in sickness, calm your lonely nights, and surround you with love today and always.